Hello everyone, welcome to History NCERT series by PM5S. I am Dr. Vishwjeet Kawar. We have already started this NCERT series. In this series, I will be covering and discussing all the chapters of History NCERT textbook. So now in today's lecture, we are going to see this Class 8 NCERT third chapter part 2. In the first part, we have already seen these three systems of land revenue. That is permanent settlement, Rayatwari and Mahalwari. In today's lecture, in the second part, we are going to discuss how these Britishers or East India Company or the officials of the East India Company forced Indian peasant and cultivators to cultivate the crop of their choice. So it was not the choice of Indian farmer or Indian peasant. No, during this 18th century, there was industrialization. So because of the industrialization, many industries were set up in the European countries or particularly in the England. So they needed some raw material. If you consider the agriculture, this cotton or silk or indigo, all these were required in the different industries of these European countries. So to supply these, they needed the support of Indian cultivators. So sometimes they persuaded the Indian cultivators to cultivate the crop of their choice, or most of the times they forced Indian cultivators to produce that crop. So now we are going to see all these things directly from the NCERT. Crop for Europe. Remember this heading. This crop basically not for Indians, it was produced for the Europeans. The British realized that countryside could not only yield revenue, it could also grow crop that Europeans required. What Europeans requires? Europeans required basically the raw material. By the late 18th century, the company was trying its best to expand the cultivation of opium and indigo. We will going to see particularly this example of indigo, why the indigo was important during this 18th century and why particularly they resorted to Indians or Indian cultivators for this indigo cultivation. In the century and a half that followed, the British persuaded or forced, remember this, most of the time British forced Indian cultivators in various parts of India to produce other crops such as jute in Bengal, tea in Assam, sugarcane in United Province means present day Uttar Pradesh, wheat in Punjab, cotton in Maharashtra means Deccan part, and rice in Madras. So most of the time for the need of European industries, they persuaded or most of the times they forced the Indian cultivators to cultivate the crop which Europeans needed. So now in this lecture we are going to see particularly the example of indigo. We will see the example of indigo plant, why the British persuaded or forced Indian cultivators to grow this indigo. If you know, this blue dye is mainly produced using, first is indigo plant and second is woad plant. So this is the indigo plant with this purple or sometimes light pink colored flowers, and from these green leaves they produce this blue dye. This is woad plant. This is plant with yellow flowers, and from these green leaves they produce this blue dye. So if you consider the dye from the indigo plant, it was rich blue color. Blue color was richer. In this from the woad plant, it was pale and dull blue color. So definitely naturally this European manufacturer, cloth manufacturer, they preferred this indigo plant, means blue dye from indigo plants. Actually they also use this woad plant, but they mostly prefer this indigo plant. But the main problem is this indigo plant primarily grow in the tropic region. You can consider India, and this woad plant primarily grow in the temperate region. As it is grow in the temperate region, there is easy availability of this woad plant, and there is no easy availability of this indigo plant for Europeans in the European countries. So as it was not easily available, it was costly. So though they preferred this indigo plant, means dye from the indigo plants, most of the times they need to use the dye from woad plant. Before this industrialization, to protect this wood plant producers or wood producers, most of the times European countries banned this import of indigo from other country to the European countries. Why? To protect this wood plant producer. But remember, during this industrialization in the 18th century, there was high demand of this blue dye, and even if they have this wood plant, blue dye from the wood plant, it was not sufficient. So during this industrialization in the 18th century, finally they cancelled this ban on import of indigo. So if you see this 18th century, due to the industrialization in the Europe, cotton production was increased. As cotton production was increased, the demand for the cotton, demand for the cloth dye, as well as this demand for the indigo increased. See, we already know that before the industrialization they banned this indigo, but now even these wood plant producers, when unable to supply in that excess quantity which is required during this industrialization, so they cancelled this, they abolished this ban, and they now allowed this import of indigo because of this increase in the demand. Remember, during this 18th century, there was increase in the demand because of the industrialization. At the same time, there was decrease in the supply from West Indies and North America. Means during that time, actually their main suppliers were Caribbean island and America. But during this time, the supply from this both of these country was decreased. There were many various reasons, but main reason was, first is American Revolution and second is slave revolt in Saint Domingue in 1791. So there was a slave revolt. All these African slaves which were working in this Caribbean island, they revolted in 1791. Actually it was a French colony. After this revolt, means in the 1791, French abolished the slavery in 1792, and subsequently the indigo production was reduced from this island. So now because of this industrialization, demand already increased, and at the same time, because of various reasons, mainly American Revolution and slave revolt, the existing supply decreased. So now Britain or European countries only have one option, that is resorted to Bengal or India. And during that time, these Europeans or officials of East India Company or various planters, they forced Indian cultivators to cultivate this indigo, and then they imported indigo from India to Europe. If you consider the import of indigo into Britain from India in the end of 18th century in 1788, it was just 30%. But if you consider after 22 years in 1810, it was almost 95%. So you can see the change because of the increasing demand of indigo. Why the demand for indigo? We have already seen why there is a demand, because it was rich blue color. The indigo plant grows primarily in the tropic. You can consider India. By the 13th century, Indian indigo was being used by cloth manufacturers in various European countries. However, only small amount of Indian indigo reached the European market, and its price was very high. Means as it was not easily accessible in the European market, it was costly. European cloth manufacturer therefore had to depend on another plant called wood to make the blue dyes. Being a plant of the temperate zone, wood was more easily available in European market. It was grown in northern Italy, southern France, and in the parts of Germany and Britain. Worried by the competition from indigo, wood producer in Europe pressurized their government to ban the import of indigo. So we already know, we have already discussed, before this industrialization, to protect this wood producer, various government in the European countries, they banned this import of indigo. Cloth dyers, however, preferred indigo as a dye. Why? Because of this rich blue color. Indigo produced a rich blue color, whereas the dye from wood was pale and dull. By the 17th century, European cloth producer persuaded their government to relax the ban on indigo import. By the end of 18th century, when there was industrialization, the demand of this indigo was already increased. At the same time, supply from this Northern America and Caribbean island was decreased. By the end of 18th century, the demand for Indian indigo grew further. Britain began to industrialize and its cotton production expanded dramatically, creating an enormous new demand for cloth dyes. While the demand for indigo increased, its existing supply from the West Indies and America collapsed. Means there was increase in demand, at the same time there was decrease in supply. For a variety of reasons, between 1783 and 1789, the production of indigo in the world fell by half. Cloth dyers in Britain now desperately look for a new source of indigo supply. From where could this indigo be procured? From India. Now they focused on India. They forced Indian cultivators to grow as much indigo as possible. Britain turns to India. Faced with the rising demand of indigo in Europe, there was rise in demand because of two reasons. One is industrialization and second was decrease in existing supply from North America and Caribbean island. Faced with the rising demand of indigo in Europe, the company in India looked for the ways to expand the area under cultivation. If you see this expansion, means if you see the import of indigo from India to Britain, it was 30% in 1788 and 95% in 1810. So how was indigo cultivated? If you see the cultivation of indigo, there were two methods. First is Needs cultivation and second is Rayati cultivation. If you see Needs cultivation, in the Needs cultivation, the land was purchased or rented by planters. So the cultivation was on the land of planter. If you see this Rayati cultivation, Rayat means cultivators. So here the cultivation is on the land of Rayat or cultivator. Remember this basic difference. In the Needs cultivation, cultivation was done on the land purchased or rented by planters. In this Rayati cultivation, cultivation was done on the land of this Rayat or cultivators. Suppose they want to do this cultivation on a large scale. The main problem was indigo was cultivated only on fertile land. So they need this extensive land. In the most populous area of Bengal, it was very difficult to get this extensive land. That was the first limitation. Second limitation is to do this on a larger scale. They need large labor. So getting this large labor force was difficult because during the same time there was a period of rice cultivation. And third thing is to do in a larger scale, they also need large number of bullocks as well as plow. So getting all these things were difficult for the planters. That's why less than 25% of the cultivation was under this Needs cultivation. If you compare with the Rayati, in Rayati more than 75% cultivation was under this Rayati out of this total indigo cultivation. In this Rayati type of cultivation, what happened is the land is of cultivators. Then why cultivators are doing this cultivation? Because in the initial phase, means before even the sowing season, these planters give some incentive. What is incentive? They give advance loan in the low interest. Means before the sowing season, if Rayat agreed for this, if Rayat signed the contract that they would agree that they would cultivate indigo on minimum 25% of the land. If they agree for this, these planters give advance loan at low rate of interest. So that was the incentive for cultivators. They are getting money in advance. But the most problem for the cultivator in the Rayat system is after initial few years, because once they get this loan, the loan was not interest free, right? They have to give loan but at the lower interest. In the next year, when they produce this indigo, when they were selling this indigo to these planters, they mostly purchased this at minimum cost. Means they purchased at lower price. So the price cultivators are getting is minimum and they can barely pay the last time's due. Means they were able to pay only the last year's interest plus amount. Means they were only able to pay last time's due. Now for the next year survival, they have to again take the loan from this cultivator. So after few years they understood this, that they are going in this debt trap, and finally because of all these things they resisted and responded with revolt. We will see this Indigo Rebellion or Neel Bidroho. Now we see this, how was indigo cultivated. There were mainly two main systems of indigo cultivation. We have just seen, first is Needs cultivation and second is Rayati cultivation. Within the system of Needs cultivation, now we are going to see this Needs cultivation. The planters produced indigo in the lands that he directly controlled. Remember this point. In the Needs cultivation, cultivation is done on the land of planters, but in the Rayati cultivation, cultivation is done on the land of Rayat. He either bought the land or rented it from other zamindars and produced indigo by directly employing hired laborer. The problem with Needs cultivation. So in the problem with Needs cultivation means the problem for planters in the Needs cultivation. The planters found it difficult to expand the area under Needs cultivation. Why? Because indigo was cultivated only in the fertile area, and in the Bengal, where the most of the population reside, means in the highly populated area, it was difficult to get the large land, large single land, means they could get but only in the fraction. So indigo could be cultivated only on fertile land, and these were all already densely populated, means getting this large tract of land in the same place was difficult. Second, nor was labor easy to mobilize. A large plantation required a vast number of hands to operate, and labor was needed precisely at the time when peasants were usually busy with their rice cultivation. So getting this large amount or in the large number laborer was most difficult thing, because there was a simultaneously rice cultivation. And third thing is about requirement of large number of plough and bullocks. Needs cultivation on larger scale also required many ploughs and bullocks. So getting all these things were difficult for the planters. So for the planters, Needs cultivation was hard task or not that profitable as compared to Rayati. Till the late 18th century, planters were therefore reluctant to expand the area under Needs cultivation. It was not profitable as much as Rayati cultivation. Less than 25% of the land producing indigo was under this system, means less than 25% under Needs cultivation, more than 75% under Rayati cultivation. Indigo on the land of Rayat, means this is Rayati cultivation. Basic difference is, in the Needs cultivation, indigo was produced on the land of planters. In the Rayati cultivation, indigo was produced on the land of Rayat or cultivator. Under the Rayati system, the planters forced the Rayat to sign a contract or agreement, means they forced the cultivators to sign the contract that they would cultivate indigo on minimum 25% of the area, and most of the time they force these cultivators that 25% should be most fertile. Among the available land with this cultivator, the 25% on which these cultivators are cultivating this indigo, that should be most fertile. At times they pressurize the village headman to sign a contract on the behalf of Rayat, means they also force the smaller zamindar as well as village headman to sign the contract on the behalf of the cultivators. Those who signed the contract got the cash advance from the planters at low rate of interest to produce the indigo, means this they were giving some lollipops to the cultivators, that they were giving some incentive to the cultivator that we are giving you a loan or advanced loan in low interest. But the loan committed the Rayat to cultivate the indigo on at least 25% of the area under this holding, means they were, while at the time they were signing this contract, this was under terms and condition. They have to cultivate on minimum 25% of the land under their control. When the crop was delivered to the planters after the harvest, a new loan was given to the Rayat and the cycle started all over again, because in the end, whatever the money this cultivator is getting, it was not sufficient. It was just, means the cultivators were just able to pay the last time's due. Peasants who initially tempted by the loan soon realized that how harsh the system was. The price they got for the indigo they produced was very low, and the cycle of loan was never ended, means that was this debt trap. There were other problems too. The planters usually insisted that indigo be cultivated on the best soil in which peasants preferred to cultivate rice, means they forced not only to cultivate this indigo on 25% of the land, but that 25% of the land should be the most fertile land. Indigo, moreover, had deep roots and it exhausted the soil rapidly. After an indigo harvest, land could not be sown with the rice. So that was the problem with rayati cultivation. If you see, under this British system, the most exploited class was this peasant or cultivators. We have just seen in the last lecture, first problem was high land revenue. And now we have seen the second problem, they don't have any choice. And even after this cultivation, they were not getting a good price. So ultimately, they resorted to take loan from money lenders or these planters, and the loan, when they got this loan, it was like a debt trap. They could never able to repay the complete money. So because of all these things, finally this indigo cultivator resisted and there was a Indigo Rebellion. Now we will see Blue Rebellion or Indigo Revolt or Nil Bidroh. See, until now there were many problems for the cultivators. Even in this indigo cultivation, the rayati cultivation was extremely oppressive. Finally, this rayat or cultivator responded with resistance and revolt in 1859. And first of all, they refused to grow this indigo. The rayat in Bengal refused to grow this indigo. Not only just resistance and the refusal to grow indigo, those who worked for the planters were socially boycotted. Those who worked for the planters were socially boycotted, not only the planters, and Gomastha. Gomastha means these were the agent of planters. So those who are associated with the planter and agents of planter, both were socially boycotted. If you see the attitude of zamindar and village headmen during this time, these planters not only forced the cultivator, but they also forced the smaller zamindar and village headmen to sign contracts on the behalf of cultivators. So ultimately these zamindars and village headmen, they supported this Indigo Rebellion. So they supported these rayat or cultivators. Worried by the rebellion, the government brought in the military to protect the planter from the assault and set up the Indigo Commission. If you see, before 1857, there was no such thing, that is set up being the commission and all, for the small reason. But now, after this 1857 revolt, government don't want any further revolt. That's why immediately they set up this Indigo Commission, and this Indigo Commission finally blamed the planters for these coercive methods used by the planters to cultivate this indigo. So they did blame these planters, but they said if rayat has already contract with the planters, they just finish. Means rayat now don't have the option if they had already contracted sign with these planters. But in the future, rayat can decline to grow this indigo. So they set up this Indigo Commission to inquire into the system of indigo production. The commission held the planters guilty and criticized them for the coercive methods they used with the indigo cultivators. It declared that indigo production was not profitable for the rayat. The commission asked the rayat to fulfill their existing contract, but also told them that they could refuse to produce indigo in the future. Means after this Indigo Commission, in the future rayat can decline to produce. If you see the role of educated Indians during this time, educated Indians from Bengal, they also supported this Blue Rebellion or Nil Bidroh. If you particularly see this Nil Darpan, it is a Bengali play written by Dinabandhu Mitra. It was also based on this Indigo Rebellion or Blue Rebellion. This play, that is Nil Darpan, was translated in English by Michael Madhusudan Dutt. You have to remember both of these facts. These are not given in the NCERT. After the revolt, means after this revolt, indigo production collapsed in Bengal. But now these planters moved to the Bihar. And in the 20th century, we will see this Champaran Satyagraha. It was against these planters who were forcing the cultivators, forcing the peasants to cultivate this indigo in Bihar. We will see this when going forward, when we will see this after arrival of Gandhi. So this is about the second part of chapter 3. first part we have already seen this three system: permanent settlement, Rayatwari and Malwari. Whatever we have seen this today, what we have seen the today, first of all, this Britishers or East India Company officials forced Indian cultivators to produce the crop which Europeans needed, and in that particular section we have seen this particularly about indigo plant, and finally the resistance by Indians, that is Indigo Rebellion. Indigo Rebellion. Some of you may think that I am not going in too depth for every concept, but remember, we are just covering what is given in NCERT. We are just covering so that those beginners or those who want to revise directly from the NCERT, they can understand in the deeper way. The objective of this class is just to revise NCERT, nothing more, nothing less. So in the next lecture, we will cover the next chapter of class 8, fourth chapter. Until then, goodbye.